name's Mick. I usually don't show my face on the internet, and I'm not sure if I'll keep it up, but for the time being, you just gotta put up with this, I'm sorry. For the past month, I've been using the new Analogue Solutions synthesizer Ample, which Tom from Analogue Solutions very kindly sent me to try out for a bit. I think this thing is really cool, and I've got a bit of a history of Analogue Solutions, so my first synthesizer that I ever got was the Arturia Micro Brute, and I loved that synth, super cool. But very quickly, the gas took hold and I needed more. So my second hardware synth was the Analogue Solutions Leipzig S. And for me at the time, it was just such a huge jump up in quality. I liked it so much that at the time I was working on a game I was making called Brute, and the entirety of the sound effects and quite a lot of the music was made just with the Leipzig S on its own. The Micro Brute is a cool synth, but I found I needed to put a bit of extra effort into crafting the sound to get it where I needed it to be, whereas with the Leipzig S, it just kind of always sounded great. There's something about the rawness of tone with the oscillators and the filters combined, which is something that I think carries through all of the Analogue Solutions synths that I've used. My second Analogue Solutions synth was the Impulse command, and I think this remains my favourite Analogue Solutions synth, but mainly because it's just such a strange box. It's not an obviously architected synth. The interface is really inspiring. It has this kind of dual oscillator, dual filter thing with like shared controls for both, and loads of weird cross modulating and phase modulating elements in there. It's a real kind of experimental modular sounding kind of thing, but it sounds quite distinct to his other synthesizers that I've used. So the third Analogue Solutions synth that I've used is the Fusebox, and this one didn't quite grab me in the same way as the Leipzig and the Impulse command, but it does sound amazing. So now we've got the Ample, and compared to the Leipzig, Impulse Command and Fusebox, I'd say this sits very much in the Fusebox category of their synths, and it's not surprising because this shares a lot of the same componentry and architecture as a Fusebox. But what separates this from the Fusebox is the interface. There's a lot more kind of performative controls with this touch plate here, and the pin matrix in itself is a bit of a performance device, because you can pull stuff out, plug it in time with the music, which I found I was doing quite a lot. These are tiny little connections, so it's really easy to just kind of pop them in and out, and I found that in itself was quite an interesting performance tool. It's actually kind of a straightforward synth. When I first opened the box, I was kind of surprised by the scale of it. It's a lot bigger than I imagined it to be. And all the knobs and controls, I just thought, oh cool, okay, this is going to be a real tinkering experimental box. But actually it follows a very traditional architecture. You've just got 3 oscillators that go into a mixer, that go into a filter, and the filter's only got low pass on there, which personally I found to be a bit of a limitation, but it's a beautiful sounding low pass. And then you just got, 2 contour, envelope generators. You got 1 LFO, oscillator 3 can be an LFO. If you're familiar with, the classic subtractive synth design from, Moog and that sort of thing, this is what this is. It just comes with some additional elements that kind of separate it from your more traditional synth. So the main elements that differentiate this synth are the Patternator, which is an analog sequencer that you can use to control pitch or modulation. And the Patternator has this really interesting, so this is borrowed straight from the Fusebox, and it has this really interesting, I guess very simply algorithmically determined way of distributing gates. So instead of it going do 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 do, it will kind of skip some and create really cool interesting patterns and jump around the sequences in interesting ways. And then the other kind of quirky element is this interval generator, and this just lets you transpose oscillators, and works as modulation in its own right as well. Well, I'd say that modern synths these days generally I think feel that they have to have some kind of novelty or gimmick to separate them out from the crowd. This doesn't really have that. I mean, the Patternator and the interval generator are quite novel, they are quite cool, but this is very different to something like the Make Noise Zero Coast, where you can patch into the contour generator, you patch into the function generator, which is the LFO, and it is a modular synth, and you get these like really interesting controls, and the elements within the Zero Coast have a really wide range, so you can basically turn the LFO into another oscillator if you want to, and that sort of thing. With this, like, the pin matrix looks super generous, but the options of control that you have here are quite straightforward, really. Essentially, you've got your noise sources, which you can send to the filter, or you can use it for sync or ring modulation. Then you've got your control voltages here, your LFO, your contour generators, and they can modulate stuff like filter cutoff, oscillator pitch, and that sort of thing. So it's flexible for sure, but it's not particularly generous in the routing options that you have available. Like I say, like you can't say take the LFO, the rise of the LFO, and use that to trigger the contour, or I don't know, you can't use the Patternator to modulate the decay portion of the contour generator, you know. And this other stuff, like, you know, you can't get pressure out of these touch plates here. I guess the interesting thing about this synth is that it doesn't really have a lot of those kind of gimmicky, novelty kind of elements to it. But what it does have is a fucking amazing sound. It's so rich and deep and dynamic, and I think Analogue Solutions at this point has an iconic sound, even though they use circuits, you know, from the 70s, you know, or inspired by old legacy circuits, and they've really got an eye towards like legitimate and genuine vintage sounds. I think the way that they put stuff together, I can spot an Analogue Solutions synth when I hear it, you know. It's just something about the creaminess of that low-pass filter and the kind of really alive and vibrant oscillators that they create. So if you're looking for a synth that gives you a real earnest impression of a vintage sounding synthesizer, but which has a forward-looking interface, and if this is within budget, I'd highly recommend just getting it. But that's also if you're looking for something that's kind of straightforward and kind of traditional, maybe something that you might already be familiar with, but you just want a few extra bits of controls. Like, you're looking for the sound, you're looking for the interface, but you're not looking to be particularly experimental. Like, if you want to work a lot more with sound effects, if you want to kind of have the instrument feed you ideas, then the impulse command is something that I'd recommend. Less of a budget, I'd say go for the Fusebox, because the Fusebox is going to give you a lot of what this offers, especially when it comes to the sound. Like, I couldn't say that this sounds better than the Fusebox. Like, they're both in the same world, you know. Impulse Command is on its own world. It sounds very different, but, you know, also sounds extremely quality and inspiring. But also, I've still got a soft spot for the Leipzig. I think they've stopped making them now, but if you can pick one of them up on eBay, man, I'd really recommend going for that as well. But yeah, thanks Tom for sending this out to try, and I'll see you all soon.